because practice makes perfect. So here's another kata. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Bringing the Thunder. Now, today I have with me a new guest, a new expert guest on GQI and ad hoc data sources, right?
Yes, exactly.
And today we are going to be all ears and listen to what you have to say. But first, let me ask, who are you and what do you do in our company here?
Yes, okay, thank you. My name is Bart. I am DevOps engineer at Skyline.
Okay.
I work in the data exploration product domain. So
Yes.
our domain is mainly responsible for creating products related to visualizing, consuming data as users.
That's the similar domain as our previous guest,
Yes.
Sebastian, probably. Yes.
Exactly. So
Excellent.
dashboards, low-code apps, GQI are all part of our domain. So,
You're building up my hype, at least, because I really loved what Seba had to show us.
okay.
So I'm really looking forward to GQI as well. I'm pretty much approaching this again with very limited knowledge, which should be great for everyone else watching, because that means I might ask the same silly questions that you're thinking, but let's see what you've got for us,
Okay,
right?
perfect. So maybe then I start with a small introduction about GQI, what it is.
Sure,
It's
of
okay
course,
for-
go for it.
So I can maybe just conceptually, what is GQI? It stands for Generic Query Interface.
Okay.
It's basically a data engine responsible for querying and fetching data on one side, and on the other side, it's about generating meaningful insights. For example,
Right.
think about I have a system, a Microsoft platform element, and I want to retrieve all CPU usages for all my processes. Okay?
Yes.
That's something I can fetch with GQI, but maybe I don't want to retrieve all these usages, but maybe I just say, okay, give me the 3 highest values, or give me all the processes with a CPU usage of more than 1%.
So it's kind of reporting then, like...
Yes, it can be used to generate these meaningful metrics, insights about your data.
Okay, right.
And how can you use GQI? Well, you can go to the Dashboards app or to a low-code app.
Okay.
And if you click, for example, let me quickly create a new dashboard.
So it's either, you can do both the dashboard and a low-code app.
Yes, indeed.
It's the same UI.
You'll find the same UI indeed. So, and on the right side, I have queries, and that's basically where you can talk to GQI. So if I click plus, I will create my very first new query. And the first thing he asks is select your data source.
All right, so that is where the GQI query begins, pretty much.
There
So-
begins it. So it's basically a bit conversational. You create a query, which is basically a way of saying to GQI what you want. Okay.
Right.
So the first thing you always need to do is select your data source, because that defines what data do you want to fetch. And so by default, I have quite some data available from my DataMiner system. So imagine I select something like elements. Then it asks me, okay, do you want to apply additional operators? Because through operators, you can generate these metrics, these insights. So if I would say select operator, you will see a list of all the different operators which come in with GQI. Think about aggregations. So if you would like to calculate or to calculate the maximum, minimum, average, and so on, you can filter data. You can join even data on other data sources. You can select, sort, and topics. So that's basically GQI. So you build your query to identify to GQI what do you want
Right,
to
so
fetch.
you're using a UI-based approach to create a query that will then
Yes.
request whatever data you want from your environment, from your digital environment.
Yes, and it's
Is it only then within the elements and views and services of DataMiner, or?
Well, that's an excellent question, because indeed it starts by providing the user with options
Yes.
tightly coupled with DataMiner. Think about elements, certain tables, parameters, and so on.
Okay.
But we are not limiting ourselves to that, and that's exactly what the session is about. We will extend GQI. So we will create our very own data source,
I
which
see.
basically makes it possible to fetch data from anywhere else. Think about data which is stored behind an API endpoint. Think about data which is maybe stored in a different database or in a file or whatever. So,
But this is different from a connector like we're used to in DataMiner. Usually we will use a connector, or also known as protocol or driver,
Yes.
depending on how old you are. But so a connector to mainly communicate and get data, but this is something else. This is something...
this is really ad hoc. This is, if you open a dashboard, you will fetch the data at that moment in time. So if you, for example, would pull an API endpoint, or you would fetch an API endpoint,
Right.
if you use that query, you put it in your dashboards, then it will fetch the data from that API endpoint, it will put it into you. into your dashboard, for example.
So it's kind of, if I'm getting it right, it's more of a KISS approach, keeping it simple and stupid. Like if you want a dashboard and it's about CPU, then you just want to get the CPU, or you want, if it's about, frequency modulation or something, you just want to get the frequency of your signal. That's it. Like you don't really, in this use case, you would not be interested in everything that, for example, the Microsoft platform element has to offer. You might be interested in just a few things, and then this guy could...
Yes, exactly, because what you might also have remembered from one of the previous sessions is that low-code apps are really built for your tailored use case. So you can really build a dashboard or low-code app for that exact one use case. But GQI is a very good fit for that, because with GQI you can exactly fetch the data that you need to display in your dashboard. So indeed, as you say, I don't want that whole table, I just want that one column. You can use GQI to really fetch that data that you want to visualize in your dashboard.
From an existing element, or even from a device if you create an ad hoc data source.
Exactly. So
and how do you go about doing that?
Okay, let me explain. So maybe I will just quickly give some context about what we try to achieve now here.
Sure.
So we will, in this exercise, in this kata, we will try to fetch an API endpoint from which expose data about satellites.
Okay.
So there's an API out there in the wild web that exposes information about satellites, and we want to visualize that data source in our dashboard. So we are going to create an ad hoc data source that fetches that data, put it into GQI, and then
specifically, to get some data on those satellites.
Yes, exactly.
So actual real satellites.
Yeah.
In space.
In
Excellent.
Space. Yes.
Okay. So people can follow along with this, I'm guessing, right?
Indeed.
So everyone, for free, everyone can actually follow along with this, I guess, step by step. And at a certain point in time, again, you'll be able to take a screenshot of what you have, send that into whatever is described in the description below, probably going to be either Thunder at Skyline or uploading it through the dojo. You can see in the description. But so I guess this is the part where everyone really gets to follow along. So
yes, indeed. So if you want to follow along, please you can go to the catalog once again.
Okay.
And there you will find a package called Satellites GQI DS. It's GQI data source.
Catalog.dataminer.services, and then you search for satellites, and we're probably a bit more satellites. GQI DS.
You will probably find it indeed if you search for one of these two words. Okay. If you have deployed it, maybe I can quickly show you.
Sure.
You can just click deploy, select your system, and then click deploy. I already did it on my system, so I won't trigger it again. But normally after some minutes, you will be able to have that automation script on your DataMiner agents. So
good. Okay.
Once everything is succeeded and you go to your DataMiner, you will find this Satellites GQI DS automation script in there. Okay. So maybe you might wondering, okay, why do I need that automation script? Because of course GQI needs some piece of code to actually communicate with that external source.
Yeah.
Right? We need like some piece in the middle that does all that communicating and provides the actual data to GQI. So for that,
the light version of a connector.
Yeah.
But then through an automation script that just requests one or two things.
Indeed. And
great.
The beautiful thing is as well that it is actually just C# code. But of course we are leveraging the power of automation module in DataMiner to compile that piece of C# code into a library.
Okay.
Because GQI can interact with these libraries, which are stored as library, it have to be compiled somehow. So that's why we use the automation module in DataMiner. So very important is that always check if you create your ad hoc data source that this compile as library with name.
Because it is a library, as you just said.
Yes,
right.
Indeed.
Good.
Okay, so you will find quite some code already in that class, but maybe let's open it in Visual Studio, because then we can really get start programming our data source.
Yeah, and leverage some of the power of DIS extension and all of that.
Yes.
Beautiful niceness and excellent. Just plugging my own software.
Okay, so if we open Visual Studio, I will just continue without codes. Okay. And I will indeed first use this DataMiner Integration Studio to connect to my DMA. So we can then pull in that automation script in Visual Studio.
All right.
So I will just connect to that DMA.
Because these are relatively, well, the meaning behind them is to be relatively simple automation scripts, so they don't really have too much assemblies and stuff. on them,
Indeed,
which
yeah.
means you can just import them from your agent, especially in this case here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I will just go for import automation scripts, and normally you will find the satellite GQI DMS as in here as well.
Yes.
So I'll just click import, and you will find it is correctly pulling in that automation scripts. If I click this little icon, I will go to the source code, see the C# version of that automation scripts, and you will see that it should pop up. Yes, there it is.
Good.
All right. So
now you opened this because I'm guessing what we just pulled from the catalog isn't complete.
exactly, and that's the exercise you are going to do.
Okay, so the exercise is completing it. Okay.
The exercise is completing it because you will see right now it has two classes. So it's a globals one and a satellites helper. The globals is just some global variables that are used by the satellites helper. But the satellites helper is basically a class responsible for fetching the actual satellites from the API endpoints and putting that into objects. So it's quite some custom codes which I pre-created for us. So we don't have to do this in this session. But if you want to, feel free to take a look at it. It's quite some code responsible for fetching these satellites.
Okay.
So, but
you've handled that for us.
yes,
Thank you very much.
No worries. Because it's really depending on the use case the user has. Sometimes they want to fetch it from another API endpoint. So it really depends on the actual data that you're fetching, that code basically. So what we are focusing on in this session is really putting that data then into GQI.
Visualizing it and making the query.
Yeah, but also fetching of using that helper and putting these objects into objects that GQI understands basically.
Right, kind of adapter.
Yeah, indeed.
Changing it from,
Yes.
So, okay.
So that's our goal of today basically.
Okay, how do we
Yes.
continue? I was going to say, how do we start? But we've started. We're in the middle of it. So.
Yes. So first of all, we see some red lines. We don't really like them.
Ah, the good old squiggly lines. Yes.
That's probably always, because...
always what we need to fix.
Yes, that's probably because we're missing some reference, or it's probably some outdated assembly which is
NuGets
still
or
there.
libraries.
Indeed. So let's check for that. In tools, NuGet package manager, manage NuGet packages for solution. And there we see it. So it is using dev automation. It contains the SL analytic types which we need for the ad hoc data
dev
source.
packs, when you want to start with automation scripts, that's the ones that they contain all the assemblies you need.
Yes,
from DataMiner. But from a specific version. I'm gonna guess you need to upgrade the version.
Indeed, I need to upgrade the version. I will just go for the latest and stable, but normally I think for GQI ad hoc data sources, the first increment on that was in 10.2.4.
10.2.4, okay.
But let's go for the last version and we have all the features available.
Okay, but so 10.2.4 probably the minimum.
That's the minimum indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
I will just install it, and normally if you go back to the C# file, yes, all the red lines are gone. So that's good.
Step 1 is always get rid of the squiggly red lines.
Yes, indeed.
Programming 101. Okay.
Okay, so currently we have just an empty class satellites data source. As I said, so we need some piece of C# code in between so GQI can communicate. But of course, just a class is not enough. Of course, GQI needs to know what can I expect from that class. So we need some of a contract between GQI and the class in order so GQI is able to actually invoke the methods that he expects to be there.
Right.
So in contract, so that's a concept also.
You're trying to describe an interface.
Exactly.
Okay.
So with our interfaces, we have that contract. So that's how you can define your class as a data source by implementing the GQI data source interface. So it is already there, but it's commented. And as you can see, the GQI data source
is expecting specific methods so that the DataMiner, at least the GQI module, knows what to call.
Yeah, indeed.
Makes sense.
So we need to implement these methods. I will just click implement the interface. I will see two methods have been provided to our class, namely the get columns and the get next page. So these two methods are required from GQI to your class in order that you have a data source. Okay.
All right.
So two methods, get columns, get next page. Quite obvious. The get columns method is basically GQI asking the implementation what columns do you provide? So what columns are available in my data source? The get next page is then responsible for fetching or providing the actual data to GQI.
When you mention get columns, I'm guessing that means, I'm just inferring from what you said, that GQI considers all data to be tables. The things you provide are always tables of data.
Yes, indeed.
So that's why you've got get columns.
Yep.
And then the get pages, what?
As the actual data, so they are the rows. But GQI is as lazy as possible, meaning that he tries to fetch data in a paged way. So if you only see the first 50 rows, then we don't need all the data.
Oh, right. Yes.
So that we try to make it as efficient as possible. Okay, for this exercise, it doesn't really matter, but it might happen in some more advanced use cases that you might want to limit the amount of data provided, and maybe you provide pages of size 100 or 200, depending on what you prefer in your use case.
Okay, I see. So the page is just a number of rows of those columns.
Yeah, you can just provide pages to GQI until you are done with all your data, basically.
Okay, great.
Okay, so first of all, implementation of the get columns. So we will use this get satellites method to retrieve the actual data, and that method will return a list of satellites. So maybe let's quickly check what that data actually means. So it's one satellite has an ID, a name, longitude, latitude, velocity, and altitude.
Right.
Maybe
it's read-only, I hope.
It's our getters and its properties.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, we won't manipulate the satellites.
Velocity.
It wouldn't be nice indeed.
Okay,
so we have these properties. So let us expose, or let us create a table with 3 columns: the name and the latitude and longitude of a satellite.
Right.
So why I'm showing you that is because we will need to define it in the columns. If we only want to expose these 3 properties, we
that's
only
the
need
data you want to give to GQI.
Yeah, indeed. So we will create 3 columns. So we will need to return 3 columns in this method. So let me create a new array, because it's expecting an array of GQI column. So let's return a new GQI column array. All right, I can already remove this exception. Of course, now we only have an empty array. Let's provide that with the actual columns. So we will need to create 3 new columns. The first one is a GQI string column. GQI string column, like this. All right, and that needs to have a name. So we will provide a name to that column. We will call it just name, because this column will contain the data, the name of every satellite.
Your name is the name in this case.
Exactly. So then we want one for the altitude and the longitude and latitude.
Let me guess the numbers. So
these are doubles.
We got doubles?
Yeah, exact.
So GQI double column, I suppose, or?
Yes, there we have it.
Nice.
Let's call it latitudes. All right, and now do the same thing for our longitudes.
I always misspell that word. I'm always happy they're spell checkers, because longitude, for some reason, I had a few code reviews who came back and said, hey, fix it. All right, whoops. Okay.
Indeed, so these are our columns. Maybe I can quickly show you as well the documentation, because there are other types of column available. And if you might want to have another type of column.
So in the docs.dataminer.services.
Yes, indeed. In docs.dataminer.services, you can find all objects you can use in these scripts.
Okay, nicely documented.
Indeed, and so all different types available for your GQI column. Also the properties available on these objects are available in the documentation.
Great.
So just for reference.
That's good. Always good.
So these are our columns. Then of course, we still need to provide the actual data. So we will need to fetch these satellites, basically, create our page, provide the rows, cells, and so on. So you can see in this get next page method, we need to return a new GQI page. So let me already create that. Return new GQI page. All right. But of course, it still needs something in the constructor. It needs an array of GQI rows, because a page contains of rows.
Yes.
So we will need to create rows, but we will need to create a row for every satellite that we fetch from the API.
So we're going to have to get the satellites first and then loop it?
Yes, indeed.
Good.
So let's do that. So let's create a variable for the satellites indeed. And then we can use the helper that was created before. So the satellites helper has one method, get satellites.
Yep.
Maybe I will just do a take on that to limit the amount of satellites we retrieve.
There's quite a lot up there, so be careful. Okay.
Get satellites. Yes. Here we go. Say like 100 satellites. So now we're limiting just the amount of satellites we retrieve, 100, and
Perfect.
we will indeed loop over all these satellites, create a row for each satellite, and put that into the page.
Okay.
That's in a nutshell what we are going to do. So maybe first let's create a rows list, which is basically where we are going to store our rows in. So GQI row lists. All right, and now we are ready, or maybe I can already provide the rows to the GQI page. It needs to be an array, so let me do that. All right, so now we are ready to iterate over the satellites. So let's do a for each loop. For each for satellites in satellites, we will do something. What are we going to do? Well, we are going to create a new row. So sure.
Okay.
Ignore these ones. So we'll create a new row, which is a new GQI row.
Which will then fill in with the data that we got from the API call.
Indeed. So once again, that row has a constructor. It needs to an array of GQI cell. So once again, we need to create an array of cells, which basically maps on the columns. So we have 3 columns, so we need to provide for every row 3 cells, basically.
Yes.
So that's our table.
Your table that you're providing pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me do that. So we will need to create a new GQI cell array. And that array will need to have 3 cells. So let's create a GQI cell. All right. Of course, that cell, we need to provide data to that. And a cell has 2 properties, has a value and a display value. So the value is the raw value actually. It's optional to also provide a display value. So sometimes you might want to add a unit to a certain cell. That's something you can add through the display value.
But do you need to, maybe silly question, but do you need to do that here, or is that not more part of the UI part of like the dashboard creation or the
well, it depends because sometimes GQI is very generic and GQI also really don't know what the actual data is.
Okay.
So if we create our data source, then we are responsible of providing the display value because GQI just sees, okay, is there a display value, yes or no? And the dashboard also cannot really know what the data actually is if you create an ad hoc data source. So this is here the point where you need to provide the display value.
Right. Okay, I see. Because at that point in time, you don't know if the original data was, for example, milliseconds. So then how does it know what to do? So
yes, indeed.
Best you do that here. Okay.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Okay.
So, but for now, we will just provide the value, saying it's the first column. So let's say the value is the name. So our first cell is our name value, basically. And then we have still 2 other cells that we need to provide containing the latitude and longitude. I also misspelled it.
Yes.
There you got me.
See, not the only one.
Yes. So satellite dot latitude. Here we go. And then we do the same thing for our longitude. And I like Visual Studio's recommendations. Okay, so we've created our array of cells, basically.
Is this it?
This is it, almost. We need to provide that cells array to our row.
Oh, yes, of course. We still need to add the...
Indeed, we can indeed add our row to the rows list. And normally, this should be it.
So that should be then, if you upload that to DataMiner again, this is considered then not just an automation script, but pretty much a new type of artifact. And
yes.
Ad hoc data source, or how do you call it exactly?
It's an ad hoc data source.
Ad hoc data source, sure. So, and then that one can be picked up by dashboards. And
we will see indeed. Maybe something good to mention is, you might have seen that we have a GQI metadata attribute above the class. This is used to provide a name to the data source. So this name, this string value is
Will-
also displayed in the dashboard
Will
tab.
probably show up in
Yeah.
the... Okay.
Indeed. So let's publish that script. I've saved it. Let's publish by clicking that publish button. And normally, if we now go to the dashboards app,
Is it another one of those moments? You know, I love this one, guys. When the demo is, the heartbeat is going of my guest.
indeed,
Did it work?
did it work? All right, so let me create a new query. Let's go for ad hoc data because all data from your DataMiner system will be shown up.
Okay.
But there is one
Particular one, ad hoc data.
ad hoc data. So all your data sources you create will be listed up under the ad hoc data sources.
Okay.
So we can just click the satellite. So we have created our data
So it's
source.
in there, yeah.
So satellite's in there. It's already one.
But is it the new one?
Is it the new one? So you can drag and drop the query to the dashboards,
Okay.
and we can then pick a visualization. So let's go for the table, and you will see we have our 3 columns that we created. We have every row is now a satellite with a name, a latitude, and a longitude.
Yeah, that's pretty great. That's really, keep it simple, keep it stupid, but you get the data you need
Yes, and
for the particular situation you want,
yeah,
and you can just show it.
yeah. Maybe something cool to mention as well is because it's GQI, so we provide operators and so on. You can still
Filter on that, maybe.
filter on that. Indeed, you can filter. You can even join it. You can select certain data.
Perfect.
Because yeah, it's just within GQI.
Can I ask, how often does this like fetch that data? Because I don't know, I didn't see us program that in. So
Yeah.
usually with an old school, with a connector, when you have the bigger picture of everything, you make timers and you specify how fast something.
That's a good question because GQI is currently really about a snapshot. It takes a snapshot of the data. It fetches it the moment I open the dashboard. But in that satellites helper, I implement a little bit of caching so that we don't pull the API too often.
Okay.
So it's really about the implementation. But normally, if you open your dashboard, it will always try to call all these.
Snapshot of that. Okay.
Yeah, it will call all these methods.
Okay. Right.
Indeed. And maybe that we are talking about that, it's maybe interesting to show you that there are life cycles. So if you create a query, if you fetch a query, that's like a life cycle GQI goes through. So it might be interesting for you if you create your data source to know exactly how that life cycle works because
it's fully documented as well. Then.
Indeed, it's fully documented and you can see when a certain method that we have implemented will be called. So every time I fetch a query, it will call the get columns, it will call the get next page.
So it nicely explains that. Great. Okay.
Yes. And maybe one cool thing we can still do.
Sure.
We can maybe convert that to a map because satellites are located on a map.
Oh, you got a map component.
So we can show that as well. So it's maybe
because
cool.
you did latitude and longitude.
Yes. So you can see all these satellites popping up on the map where they are.
That's awesome. That's really great. So could we say that if someone following along takes a screenshot of this, we might consider it?
Indeed. One thing to mention about that is the maps component is still behind soft launch. I think it's the dashboards and reports GQI maps soft launch component.
So maybe we should step back and make a screenshot of the code.
The table.
The table or the table. Okay.
It's depending on it. Yeah.
Well, how about this? You can get 10 extra DevOps points if you think. I don't know if I can do that. Take a screenshot of the table and send that one in, and we'll definitely give you some DevOps points for that, right?
Yes, indeed.
Great. And if you have, I usually ask this, but if you have any use cases that you're using GQI queries and ad hoc data sources for in your actual environment, please send them in as well. We always love to hear about what you're doing with all these things that we offer you.
Indeed.
Great. Okay, I think that's probably it for this session then.
I think so.
So thank you very much for making some time and explaining this to me and
pleasure.
to everyone watching. So good luck, everyone, and I'll catch you on the next one.